Now we should be live. I thought we were live already, but we weren't. Now we are. How's everybody doing today? I think we have about a 10-second delay or so. Oh boy, everybody's spamming the types of tanks. Let me know where you're watching from, everybody. I'm always curious about that. Kind of a casual stream today. We're just going to be watching some videos about D-Day, chatting about it. Yeah, it looks like it's about a 8 to 10 second delay. That's not too bad. Awesome. I have a few videos that I picked to kind of kick us off and just to give us something to chat about. The only thing I'm going to ask, and I pinned it in the comment up above, is that we keep the chat focused on the topic of D-Day and Operation Overlord and everything that goes with that. So please don't be asking me to rank my favorite empires or who my favorite Civil War general is today. We want to focus this stream on D-Day because today is the 77th anniversary of the invasion of Normandy. So I want to honor the men who fought there. Oh, and you've been to Normandy on a trip. Very cool. I'm hoping I will be there next May, it looks like. We're going to be watching a couple of my friend JD's videos from History Underground. He's been there. He's planning another trip. And I'm planning on being with him for that next trip. And it looks like it's going to be next May. So, yeah, we can do some stuff about the Pacific Theater at some point. Oysen Murphy, you literally did what I just asked you not to do, which is ask me a question that's not about D-Day. So we're going to watch this video just to kind of give us a little bit of an intro and an overview of Overlord, and then we'll do some chatting here.
By dawn on June 6,
so this is
1940.
This is from the channel Past to Future, and it's the D-Day invasion or Operation Overlord, history, timelines, and map.
Through the fog, Allied forces landed on 5 beaches of Normandy, France, in huge numbers. With the aim to liberate France, lay the foundations for the Western Front against fascism, and ultimately liberate all Western Europe from Nazi Germany's control. Codenamed Operation Overlord, or best known today as D-Day, Normandy landing is one of the largest and most dangerous amphibious assaults in human history.
Now I should mention right off the bat that Operation Overlord is not the name of the D-Day landings. The D-Day landings are a part of Operation Overlord. Overlord's actually the entire Normandy invasion plan, which is not just D-Day, which was the day of the invasion, but it's everything that comes after D-Day. It's the first several weeks where they're planning to invade that entire peninsula and take the harbors and take key cities and all those things like that. I believe the actual D-Day invasion, I want to say that's Operation Neptune is the name of that specific part of the invasion. Yeah, Nebulous has it right.
Historical background of D-Day. By June 1940, France had fallen to the Nazis and Adolf Hitler was gloating over it as the most famous victory in history. With more than 300,000 British troops evacuating from the beaches of Dunkirk in a famous speech, the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill vowed to liberate France from Nazi Germany. A year later, the German invasion against Russia made the Soviets become one of the Britain allies. 6 months after that, America entered the war in an attempt to win it.
No, as we were just mentioning, D-Day is a part of Operation Overlord. Overlord is the entire Normandy invasion, which is not just D-Day. D-Day is just the initial stages. It's called Operation Neptune. Operation Overlord is the entire invasion of Normandy, which is several weeks worth of operations.
2 preliminary proposals were drawn up.
Oh, I love Primo
Operation
Victoria.
Sledgehammer and Operation Roundup. The latter was adopted, but delayed due to the Allied invasion of French North Africa in November 1942, the invasion of Sicily in the following year, and Italy in 2 months after that. In December 1943, at the Tehran Conference, Roosevelt and Stalin combined against Churchill to insist on launching the invasion across the English Channel within the next year. Allied preparation for D-Day. In January 1944, U.S. General Dwight Eisenhower was appointed Supreme Allied Commander to lead an invasion by the codename Operation Overlord. In the months leading up to the invasion, the Allies conducted Operation Bodyguard, the overall strategy designed to mislead the Germans about the date and location of the landings.
So yeah, some of you are already mentioning this about Patton being in charge of a fictitious army that was organizing near Dover, because the Germans knew that the two most likely places for a landing were either Calais, because it was the shortest point between Britain and France, or at Normandy because of the beaches that were here. So knowing from intelligence that Patton was considered the Allies' best general by the Germans, they put Patton in charge of a fictitious landing army. Now, Patton was told he was going to be given an army once they had finished Overlord. Once they had established the beachhead, they would give Patton command of a real army. But in the meantime, they had inflatable tanks. They had radio traffic giving orders and everything. I mean, this was a incredibly elaborate deception plan, and the Germans fell for it hook, line, and sinker. As much as the things that happened on D-Day itself were important, the intelligence deception that went into this was just as important. They were dropping dummy paratroopers that would actually make noises and sound like they were shooting behind German lines to confuse them, because what they knew was that they'd probably at least get ashore. The concern was German reinforcements, especially panzer divisions, which were held back, and that they knew could push them back off the beach. Because Rommel, who was in charge of these forces in this area, he knew that if the Allies could establish the beachhead, it was over. He felt the only chance the Germans had to win the war was to throw them back before they could establish themselves.
3 months later, Allied forces launched Exercise Tiger, a rehearsal for the D-Day invasion. Between April 1st and June 5th, over 11,000 aircraft were deployed, 200,000 sorties were launched, and 195,000 tons of bombs were dropped on French rail centers and road networks, etc., succeeding in isolating the invasion area from the rest of France. By early June, the number of troops present in Britain reached more than 2 million Americans, along with 250,000 Canadians in preparation for the Normandy invasion. Millions of tons of supplies were shipped from America to the staging area, including 450,000 tons of ammunition. German preparation. In November 1943, aware of a threat of an invasion along France's northern coast, Adolf Hitler appointed Erwin Rommel to spearhead defense operations in the region and finish the Atlantic Wall, a 2,400-mile fortification of bunkers, landmines, and beach and water obstacles.
So I see you guys are talking about Saving Private Ryan and the whole thing, and I talked about this on the video the other day, but yes, the five brothers were the Sullivans, and they were killed on the USS Juno at the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal in November 1942. And after that, the Army did two things. Number one was they divided up brothers so they weren't all in the same unit. They also instituted what was called the sole survivor policy, which meant that if you were the only surviving son in a family, you were removed from combat zones. And there was actually a family that the story of Saving Private Ryan is loosely based on, which is the Nyland family. And there were four brothers. One was in the Pacific, three were in the European theater. And it was thought, well, two of them were killed, one on D-Day, one the day after D-Day in Europe. And it was thought that a third one had been killed in the Pacific a few weeks earlier, but it turned out he was actually only captured in a POW and he survived the war. But because those three were all thought to have been killed, they pulled the fourth son, Fritz Nyland, out of action with the 101st Airborne and sent him back to the States as an MP for the rest of the war.
believing that the Allies would invade Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point between Britain and France. The German heavily defended the place. In the Normandy area, the best fortifications were concentrated at the port facilities of Cherbourg and Saint-Malo. By June 5th, 1944, Rommel had been able to have some 4 million more mines laid on the beaches. The D-Day. The original date of Operation Overlord selected by Eisenhower was June 5th. However, on June 4th, high winds, heavy seas, and low clouds made it impossible to launch the invasion. On the morning of June 5th, after being assured about the sufficient improvement of the weather for the following day, Eisenhower gave the go-ahead for Operation Overlord on June 6th.
So, Justin, no, Denmark wasn't the option. It was always going to be France. It was really only a question between Calais and Normandy. You want to see a really fascinating look at the behind-the-scenes part of this. There's a movie starring Tom Selleck as Eisenhower. I think it's called Ike, Countdown to D-Day. And it shows a lot of the operations and the planning and the behind-the-scenes stuff that was going on. And it actually really shows you why Eisenhower was chosen. Because Eisenhower had no combat command experience. He was in the States during World War I, so he didn't serve in combat during World War I, when a lot of other guys like Patton and others were. And in World War II, he never really had anything. He was like he was always a staff officer. And then he was given kind of operational command in North Africa and in Sicily, but he never really had a combat command. But what he was really good at was operations and the political part of things, being able to pull together a team, because you got to remember he's got to deal with the French, the Canadians, the British, all these different allies, and kind of coordinate all of that. And he did a fantastic job with that. And yeah, one of the decisions he had to make was about the weather. And so they had this guy named Group Captain Stagg, who was the weather guy, the British guy, and it was basically him that had to give Ike the weather reports about whether or not they could go. And they were all set to go. And you have to remember that the invasion force had to be on the ships and heading over like the night before. So they had to have this planned well in advance when they were going to go. And the airborne troops had to drop at like 1 a.m. And so they had to leave like around 11 o'clock at night. And so these decisions had to be made in advance. Yeah, Tom Selleck without a mustache. That's right. So they make the decision to go. And one of the really key decisions, and they show this a lot in the movie, that Eisenhower has to deal with is Trafford Lee Mallory, who was in charge of the airborne troops. And he's the brother of George Mallory, who died trying to climb Mount Everest. He was convinced that the airborne were going to suffer like 80% casualties if they didn't drop them further behind enemy lines. And so there was this decision between, do we drop them close to the beaches, close to the German troops, where they might suffer heavy casualties, or do we drop them further back where they will suffer fewer casualties but might not be able to affect things as much? And the American general, oh gosh, why do I forget his name all of a sudden? Omar Bradley is pushing for them to be close, where they can do the most damage and wreak the most havoc. But Lee Mallory's saying, no, you got to drop them further back. We can't take these kind of casualties. And so Eisenhower makes the decision to drop them close. And thankfully, the casualties weren't nearly what they were projecting they were going to be.
By dawn of the planned day, U.S., British, and Canadian forces simultaneously landed on 5 separate beachheads of Normandy, France. The British Army landed in the east on the codenamed beaches Sword and Gold. The Canadians invaded Juno Beach. The American Army captured Omaha and Utah Beach. On Utah Beach, the U.S. 4th Infantry Division and 70th Tank Battalion succeeded in landing 21,000 troops at the cost of 197 casualties. American soldiers of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions had been fighting for hours upon the soil of France and numbered an additional 14,000 men, with 2,500 casualties.
So, first of all, thank you, Superfed. Yeah, 675 we're up to now. It is a large classroom indeed, and I don't consider myself to be the only professor here. There's a lot of folks in this chat right now, I think, that have some great information, and our collective knowledge is what makes this community so much fun, because I do not know everything, nor do I ever claim to know everything. There's always more to be learned, and I learn from you guys. Hopefully you learn some from things from me. Yes, Filda, Omaha was much worse, and there were a number of reasons for that. A couple of things that made Utah not as bad. One was that the airborne were able to have an immediate impact. You see that in Band of Brothers, where they take the Breakcore Manor assault, where they take out those 105 guns that were firing on Utah Beach. So that helped clear things up. Another thing that happened on Utah was they landed in the wrong place. And that's something, there's a famous scene. We're going to watch a video about Teddy Roosevelt Jr., who was the highest ranking officer and the oldest man to land at Normandy on D-Day. And they land in the wrong place, and Roosevelt famously says, "We'll start the war from here." So that's one of my favorite scenes in that whole thing. And but Utah wasn't nearly as bad. Also, the terrain of Omaha was much more difficult. It was much more heavily defended. There were like 85 machine gun nests at Omaha Beach, and that's a lot of why you see so many more casualties.
Omaha, assigned to the U.S. 1st Infantry Division and supplemented by troops from the U.S. 29th Infantry Division, was the most heavily defended sector. At the end of D-Day, more than 30,000 troops successfully landed on Omaha at the cost of over 2,000 American casualties. Gold Beach was assaulted and taken from defending German troops by units of the British 50th Infantry Division.
Now, those numbers can be a little misleading. You know, you see something like 30,000 landed and 2,000 casualties, and you think, okay, on one hand, 2,000 casualties is a lot, but out of 30,000 on the landing, it doesn't seem so bad, right? But you have to remember that 2,000 was all pretty much in the initial waves. Some of the initial landing units had 80% casualties. It's just that a lot of men came after them that didn't have nearly the casualties.
With 25,000 troops landed and 400 casualties. On Juno Beach, the Canadian 3rd Infantry Division managed to land over 20,000 troops at the cost of 1,200 casualties. Sword Beach was assaulted by units of the British 3rd Division, with nearly 30,000 troops landed and about 630 casualties. The 6th Airborne Division added a number of 6,000 troops landed at the cost of 1,500 casualties. In those fateful 24 hours of June 6th, approximately 156,000 Allied troops had successfully stormed Normandy beaches, and Allied casualties were at least 10,000, with more than 4,000 confirmed dead.
And I'll be honest, I don't want to take anything away from the 4,000 men who died that day. That is a horrific number. That's 4,000 families who lost a son, a brother, a husband, and that's devastating to those families. But if you were to say to Eisenhower, on D-Day, we'll successfully storm the beaches, we will establish a beachhead, and we'll lose 4,000 dead, Eisenhower would probably say, we will take that, because I think he was expecting far worse than that.
Meanwhile, the Germans, in the absence of Rommel, were hampered by effective Allied air and naval support. German casualties numbered at least 4,000, but some other documents claim statistics of more than 9,000.
Yeah, X-ray, you make a good point. We cannot discount what the French resistance were doing behind the scenes, wreaking havoc with communications, with transportation, all kinds of things they were doing behind the scenes that made it tougher for reinforcement, because Eisenhower knew that the key to this for the Germans was getting reinforcements to the battlefield and getting them to the right place. And so that's part of why they dropped the paratroopers behind the lines, is to establish those connections and also prevent those reinforcements. But they're also working with the French resistance to make that happen. Jeff C., thank you. Appreciate that. Yes, I'm hoping we're going to see me on a Normandy trip next year.
After D-Day.
Azarth, I agree.
Although all of the Allies' objectives had not been completed on the first day of D-Day, the operation gained a foothold that the Allies gradually expanded over the ensuing months. On June 12th, the key town of Carrington was captured by U.S. troops, allowing 5 Allied beachheads to be connected for the first time. A week after D-Day, the Allies had landed 327,000 troops, 54,000 vehicles, and 103,000 tons of supplies in Normandy. On June 26th, the Allies captured the French port of Cherbourg. A month later, the city of Caen was captured. On August 15th, the Allies launched Operation Dragoon, the code name for the landing operation of the Allied invasion of Provence, and liberated most of southern France in just 4 weeks. 10 days later, the French capital of Paris was liberated.
So BT's mentioning the Mulberry Harbors. So when they landed, until they captured the city of Cherbourg, there were no deep water harbors. And so getting supplies to the troops that were moving inland was a big concern. So they built these kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of man-made portable harbors that they could float across and use to bring supplies in. They put a pipeline through the bottom of the English Channel to transport oil and gasoline to the troops that were needed. So all these logistics, it's just incredible the amount of logistics and planning to went in to all of this.
And just 5 days after that, the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division cost the same, as the Germans continued to fall back, marking the close of Operation Overlord. Aftermath. The epic Battle of France lasted several months with tremendous casualties on both sides. However, the very moment when the Allies broke through German defenses and liberated Paris on August 25th was clear evidence that the Nazi war machine was outgunned. On April 30th of the following year, Adolf Hitler committed suicide. On May 7th, less than a year after D-Day, Germany signed its unconditional surrender.
Nebulous, I responded to that last time you said it. I have seen Draining to the Oceans, World War II. Yeah, it's very cool. Somebody mentioned, where is it? A book to recommend on D-Day. Stephen Ambrose's book, D-Day, is very in-depth and very good. I would highly recommend that one. He's the same guy that wrote Band of Brothers. So I want to go ahead and move now to, this is really a really short one, but it's a cool scene from the movie The Longest Day, which kind of highlights Theodore Roosevelt Jr., because I want to talk about him for a few minutes.
Oh. Come on in, Teddy.
So Theodore Roosevelt Jr. is the son of Theodore Roosevelt, who was the president of the United States. And he, at this point, is the assistant division commander for the 4th Infantry Division. Jr., as I mentioned, he's the assistant division commander of the 4th Division. He lands in the first wave at Utah, is instrumental in organizing things, especially when they realize they've landed on the wrong beach. And he's the one who famously says, "We'll start the war from here." And kind of organizes things and gets them ashore. He's given the Medal of Honor for what happens there. He and his father are one of only 2 pairs of fathers and sons who have both received the Medal of Honor. The other pair is Arthur MacArthur and Douglas MacArthur. Arthur MacArthur received it for the battle at Chattanooga during the Civil War, and of course his son during World War II. Teddy Roosevelt unfortunately dies a month later. He's given command of his own division, but he dies of a heart attack. And he's actually buried in the Normandy cemetery right next to his brother. Hello in Russia. Hey, thank you. I appreciate that. I will definitely be doing some videos on the Eastern Front. And yes, Theodore and Franklin were cousins, but Franklin's wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, was actually Theodore's niece. Her maiden name was Roosevelt. So the only World War I soldier who's buried in the Normandy cemetery is Quentin Roosevelt, who was Theodore Roosevelt's son. He was shot down. He was a fighter pilot during World War I. And he was exhumed from his cemetery, World War I cemetery, and moved to the Normandy cemetery so he could be buried next to his brother, Theodore, who died in 1944. And there's the real Theodore Roosevelt there. And you can see he looks just like his dad. But here's his grave. And you can see he's got the gold that signifies that he's a Medal of Honor recipient. Died July 12th, just about a month later. And he's buried right next to his brother there in Normandy. Dermot, that's not how cousins work. You can be cousins with somebody who died 500 years ago. So let's say, for example, my grandchildren, okay? My grandchildren and my sister's great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren 200 years from now, they're still cousins. They're like second cousins 6 times removed, something like that. Cousins aren't just people whose parents are related to each are brother and sister. So, yeah, we'll talk about the German attack on Denmark at some point. All right, so we talked about that one. So I want to watch a couple of videos from my friend Lewis. Thank you. From my friend JD at History Underground, who you've probably heard me talk about by now, and he actually mentioned me. I was actually in one of his recent videos. If you like my historic site videos, you will absolutely love his channel, so make sure you head over and subscribe to him as soon as you get a chance if you're into historic site videos. But he went to Normandy last year, and he's the one I'm going to be going with to Normandy probably next spring. But he did a couple of great videos from Omaha Beach, and I wanted to take a little time and watch some of those.
I've been pretty fortunate to be able to go to a lot of cool historic places. And every once in a while, you go to a place that has so much gravity and so much weight that it just overwhelms you. And I happen to be at one of those places today. This is Omaha Beach.
So, Jeff, are you planning on trying to join us for that trip? That would be very cool if you get the chance. Yeah, so, guys, I don't know why anybody's fighting about donations. Every donation's appreciated, no matter how small. And I know a lot of you guys can't even donate at all, so it's not a big deal. Please don't make it a big deal.
So, Omaha Beach has the reputation of being the spot where some of the most violent conflict and fighting took place on D-Day. This sector that I'm in right now, the beach is divided up into technically 4 different sectors. So there's Fox, Easy, Dog, and then at the far end, Charlie.
So, and if you've seen Saving Private Ryan, I believe Dog Green sector is the landing site that you see in the movie. And then up to like Vierville right there. I think I'm pretty sure that's where it was. And yes, I know there are a lot of Germans who watch this channel, and I love them because I love Germany. Germany's one of my favorite countries. So I'm very appreciative for all of the German folks. And X-Ray, I will definitely let you guys know if I'm in Europe, for sure.
Well, Fox and Easy are in the 1st Infantry Division sector. We'll get to the 29th Infantry Division sector of Dog later. And this spot right here that I'm at is at Fox Red. So what we're looking at out in front of me is the Fox sector of Omaha Beach. And on D-Day, ships landed at about 6:30 in the morning. At least that's whenever they were scheduled to. And there was all kinds of confusion. A lot of units were way off target. And included in that was a mixed group of the 16th Infantry Regiment that was attached to the 1st Infantry Division and the 116th Infantry Regiment, which was with the 29th Infantry Division but attached to the 1st for D-Day. Well, companies I and L landed way too far.
Somebody mentioned Chandler says, look at all that land to cover. And here's the thing, too, Chandler. They made a decision to land at low tide when there would be the most ground to cover. They could have done it high tide when there was less ground to cover, but then they would have had issues with getting the ships in because of, or the landing craft in because of everything that was in the way. So it was kind of a calculated risk that they had to make. Ayush, thank you so much. I would definitely plan to do some Indian history at some point. That's something I need to learn a lot more about, because I know India has a very rich history that has been quite impactful on the world, and it's, obviously it's one of the largest countries on Earth with the most people, and that's something I definitely want to learn more about. You guys keep watching. I'm going to disappear for a second because I have to go grab an external hard drive because there's some videos I want to show you from my trip. Somebody was asking about the Curry Heat cleanup, so I'll be right back with that. You guys keep watching JD.
To the east, and also landed late. They were supposed to have armor support, but most of the armor ended up sinking in the channel, and a few managed to make it. So you can imagine these guys landing and then having to traverse this whole section of beach. Now, there was one guy by the name of Lieutenant Jimmy Monteith. I think I'm saying that name right, Monteith. He landed along with his group. Everybody was all mixed up and landed in the wrong spot. It turned out to be fortunate because they had the protection of these bluffs from a German resistance nest that's up on top of the hill that we'll take a look at later.
So somebody asked about the tanks. Yeah. They did have tanks that were designed to float, but most of them sank along with their crews. It was one of the more disastrous parts of the landings on D-Day. It wasn't a Windows error, it was me plugging my hard drive in.
So Monteith makes it to this bluff and then makes his way down the beach with his men. A lot of them had been cut down on the beach. And what they were looking for was a draw called the F1 draw that was going to give them access to the interior of the German defenses.
Look at that beach. It's so peaceful now.
I'm standing here at the water's edge.
Wow.
Just trying to
Can't wait to be
imagine
there.
what this must have been like. Absolutely can't do it. Unbelievable.
Yeah, Chandler, those poles were actually the specific brainchild of Erwin Rommel, who had them dig these pits and put those really long poles. And they did them not only on the beach, but also back further so that the Allies couldn't land gliders. Because if there's poles everywhere and there's no smooth surface for them to land the gliders, they can't get those materials in there.
Now, once Monteith and his men made it on the beach, they did the same thing that a lot of people did here on D-Day. They landed in the wrong spot, and they improvised. So Monteith was up and down the beach. He was organizing his men, putting together whoever was left. The few tanks that did make it on the beach, he was organizing fire for them, telling them where to go, going through minefields. I mean, the guy was just all over the place. And up on top of this hill, there was an element of German soldiers that were manning mortars and machine guns and artillery. And they were covering the far east end of the beach here. So Monteith grabbed some guys and they started making their way right up through here in something called the F1 draw.
Kenny, thank you, first of all. And Crossbones, yes, there are still some German bunkers. I'm going to show you a couple of those in just a minute here.
Take out this nest of German soldiers that was raking the beach with fire.
So, yeah, let's switch to another one of his, because here's one on the German defenses at Utah Beach. Check this out. This is pretty cool. I'm trying to find... Here you go. Actually, he has... Let me see if I can find him. Like I said, definitely check his channel out. There's so much good stuff. somebody mentioned something about the Beast of Omaha. So let's check that one out.
Casemate housed one of two 88mm guns on D-Day. And the whole idea with these bunkers and with these resistance nests was to provide overlapping fields of fire so that the whole beach would be covered. So right in there, you would have had the gun from an 88mm that was covering the entire length of the beach. Now this particular one, there's some other Tobruks and machine gun nests and everything with this particular Widerstand nest, but it was designed to provide overlapping fire with the resistance nest called Widerstand Nest 62, which in recent years has become the subject of quite a bit of controversy. So we're going to go take a look at that now.
Most of the beaches were captured within a few hours, but I think it took the better part of a day for Omaha. Honestly, somebody asked me about where I want to be on the beaches. Actually, it's not the beaches. I want to go see Brecourt Manor, where the guys from Easy Company took out that battery of German 105s.
So I'm here on the approach to Widerstand Nest 62, and right here at the very top, appropriately, they have a memorial to the 1st Infantry Division. So right out here in front, kind of looking at close to the dividing line between Fox Green and the Easy Red sectors of Omaha Beach. Man, oh man, it's pretty sobering. Up here they have,
wow,
on the 1st Infantry Division monument, the names of those killed in action here. Pretty sobering. Okay, now just like at Widerstand Nest 60, you can still see the remains of these German trenches that made up Widerstand Nest 62.
Look at that.
Huh. Just kind of making our way down the hill here. Now this would have had different machine gun nests and Tobruk's with mortars. Whenever we get down here, we'll see a little bit better look at some of the bunkers. So here is a monument to the 5th Engineer Special Brigade, and again it names the men from this brigade that were killed on D-Day. And up at the top it says, "In memoriam to our 80 brave comrades in arms of the 299th Combat Engineers who gave their lives on the beaches of France and on the continent of Europe in World War II, lest we forget." Wow.
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot to see. There's a lot of the emplacements that are still in place. There's a lot of the fortifications. You could still see kind of where the trenches were, even though they're starting to fill back in. Boy, there's just so much I cannot wait to be able to go over there and see at some point. So some of you guys were asking me about my trip to Currahee. So let me find a couple of the videos. I haven't gotten the video completely edited yet to show you all of it, but I'll go ahead and show you guys a couple of the clips that I've got. So here's one here. All right, well, here we go. 3 miles up, 3 miles down. Apparently, technically, it's like 2.85, but you can't actually go from the starting point where the guys at Camp Toccoa started up, because that's from a separate gate, and that gate usually remains locked. So there's a separate entrance that goes all the way out to the main road, and that's where we enter in with our vehicles. But right here is where the gate's closed, and they haven't opened it yet. But they're going to be opening it for us to drive up and start our cleanup work. But I'm doing it the old-fashioned way. We'll see how this goes. So that was my first clip beginning the march up Currahee. Andro, thank you very much. Appreciate that. CHYZ, I do not know a lot of New Zealand history. I'm not older in that video. That video was last week, actually. So there were issues with mines on the beaches at Normandy. Yes, I do not teach history, though I did go to school for that. Yeah, imagine it was Sobel. Yeah. So yeah, what's crazy about Currahee is the first 2 miles are really kind of up and down, and here I'll show you an example of that. So one of the things they don't tell you, or that you don't really get to see in the movie, is that it's not just a straight 3 miles uphill. It kind of goes back down and then up again, so you're kind of repeating the elevation. Like right now, we're going downhill, and we really haven't even gone uphill much so far, so going to be interesting when we get a little closer how steep it gets. Yeah, so the first 2 miles you really don't gain any elevation at all, but then the third mile is like straight uphill. I mean, it's ridiculously steep uphill. Oh, a mile from the top, and here we go downhill again. Oh, this is still downhill here. So here, hold on, I'll show you some uphill here in a second. All right, so first 2 miles, it's kind of flat with some downhills, some uphills, but nothing real steep and nothing for very long. You hit right at about the 2 mile mark with a mile to go. Suddenly it's a steep incline with no brakes. And I can imagine how this must have felt carrying all your equipment. These guys are in tremendous shape. I want to try and show you a clip of what it looks like, and it's hard to appreciate it in the video, just how steep it was, but it was crazy steep at the end right here. Well, the truck's finally caught up with us with the rest of the group. 0.2 of a mile to go. I'm not hitching a ride now. Woo, this is steep. It was really steep at the end, and I don't know how these guys did it with all their packs, with all of that stuff with them. It was just crazy. And then here's my first view at the top. I guess that's it. At least this is. And you can see some of the graffiti we were cleaning up. Part of the graffiti here. And oh man, what a view we're about to have. And this was all gone when we were done for the day. Wow. Wow. My goodness. This is incredible. Did I study theater? No, but I was in theater in high school, but I've been a public speaker all my life, so that has a lot to do with it. You know, I'm used to speaking in front of people. It's something I've always done. Here's me finishing it right here. I was told you haven't finished until you touch the marker that they would hit to signify they were at the top, and then they could start back down. It's not as high as what they show in Band of Brothers. It's down here on the ground, but this is the reference mark. Now I've completed Currahee. Time to get to work. So yeah, it was intense, and there was a lot of graffiti. Let me show you just some of the graffiti that we were dealing with up on top. And, as a fan of Band of Brothers, as a person who loves history, as a person who loves what these men did, it was pretty heartbreaking to see all of that. But let me show you one clip of what it looked like when we were done, because it's amazing how different it looked when we were done. Do I not have those videos on here? I don't think I do. I didn't copy all the videos over yet. So I don't have those, but you guys will see those soon. I'll have that video up pretty soon. But it really came out really good. We got a lot of work done. how it gets vandalized. A lot of teenagers go up there. It's a kind of a spot away from everything. There's incredible views all over the place. To be honest, we finished working at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. A group of our guys went up with JD that night at 10:30, and a couple of the rocks we had cleaned had already been vandalized again by the time they got up there 6 hours later. We did have a power washer hooked up to a vehicle. We were using something called elephant snot, which is like $100 a bucket. And you rub it on and you leave it there for about 45 minutes. I guess it's environmentally friendly, but it dissolves most of the paint. And then we would scrub it, and then we would spray it off. And then some of those rocks, the ones that are closer to the main road, they were actually using a sandblaster, and it was really, really, it worked fantastic. It worked really well. Here, I can show you. I'll go to JD's video and show you how it came out, because his video from our work is already done.
And put them into action and start pushing.
So you'll see me working here in a minute. This is, no, that's not my group. These folks were all great that I got to work with up there. Yeah, JD's great with his editing. He does a great job. So take a look. Here's the rock that you saw earlier. Look how clean it is. Look how great.
All of that nasty spray paint caked up on these rocks.
We were approved for the sandblasters. They said it wouldn't damage the rocks.
I don't even know where it was now. It was right here in this area where somebody had painted that awful I love Hitler statement in spray paint. So it's very cool to see this area in the process. We're not done yet, but in the process of being restored to its natural state, and to the state that the Toccoa men would have known it.
And then I'll show you one more clip from this video.
Work ahead of them are making the decision to hike up Currahee, like this guy right here.
Look familiar?
We got Chris from Vlogging Through History. So
3 miles up, 3 miles down. Now I can say I did the up anyway. Awesome.
You sound like you could use a glass of water.
I've got some in my backpack. I'm ready for it.
Awesome.
So yeah, there was a group of, I think, 8 of us that hiked it, and everybody else took the trucks up. So yeah, we're still going to go for a little while. We're going to get to some more D-Day videos here in just a minute. Never seen this person before. Who is he? So one was me, and the other one was JD from History Underground. So a lot of you have been asking me to watch this one. So yeah, I was exhausted, dude. It took me like 45, 50 minutes to get to the top. But I was walking. I didn't run the thing. So those guys had to run to the top and back to the bottom. And you got to understand, going back down was not just downhill. There were significant uphills going back down too. It was crazy. All right, so we're going to watch D-Day from the German perspective, from the Armchair Historian. You guys have been recommending this one to me, so let's go ahead and check it out.
We're very excited to announce that today's video is sponsored by Audible. More on that later.
I hope I get sponsored by them. I love Audible. The elevation difference from the bottom to the top of Currahee is about 800 feet.
You're probably already familiar with the iconic Normandy landings, but chances are you're more familiar with the experiences of those who landed on the beaches as opposed to that of the defenders, and this is fairly understandable. As military historian Robert M. Citino puts it, The D-Day landings have become one of the Allies' great historical epics, whereas for the opposite side, the romance vanishes, leaving the uninspiring spectacle of a once proud military force no longer up to the challenge. As one can expect, this leaves any military history enthusiast short on information about the Axis perspective in this battle. To be absolutely clear, our intent is not to sympathize with the Nazi regime, its supporters, or its ideology. We are simply interested in uncovering the human element of the less talked about side in this near mythological clash. First, we'll need to provide context before discussing the landings at Normandy. The confrontation on the Atlantic shoreline was long in the coming. As early as autumn of 1943, Hitler had gathered his chiefs of staff and told them that all signs point to an offensive against the Western Front no later than spring 1944. But spring passed and the Allies had yet to strike, making the atmosphere for the Germans almost unbearably tense. It didn't help that Field Marshals von Rundstedt and Rommel, the two men charged with protecting the Atlantic coast, fundamentally disagreed over the issue of tank placement. Rommel knew that because the Luftwaffe was occupied on the Eastern Front, keeping panzer divisions stationed inland, as von Rundstedt ordered them to do, was folly.
So somebody was asking about friendly fire. Friendly fire is absolutely a part of every war. I had a cousin whose grave we visit every Memorial Day, who is buried here locally, who was killed in France in November of 44. And we found out, I actually got a hold of a guy from his platoon who had kept a diary, and it turned out it was friendly artillery fire that came in too short, exploded in a tree above his platoon, hit his platoon leader and 3 men, including Harry, who was hit in the leg and killed. Something like between 10 and 20% of all casualties in World War II were friendly fire. It was higher in Vietnam.
North African campaign taught him that without air superiority, moving tanks across the countryside was a near impossible task. The German soldiers, meanwhile, did the only thing they could do to mask their apprehension. They made jokes. One went something like, if you see a black plane, it's British. If you see a white plane, it's American. When you see nothing at all, it's the Luftwaffe. The others among them, who were Polish, Georgian, and Soviet prisoners impressed into Nazi service called the Ostlegionen, probably weren't in the mood for making jokes, having been dragged hundreds of miles away from their home countries. They, along with the German soldiers who had been wounded in action, made up a significant portion of soldiers stationed on the Atlantic coast. By the time the invasion broke out, some of these troops had not been fed for several days. One soldier, Paul Goetz, who was only 17 at the time, recalls the following.
I hadn't had any food or water for 3 days, so around 6 a.m. I walked to a village and begged for milk. The French there knew me, but this time they said, "Go away, the Allies already landed with tanks."
It seems that at this juncture, the French no longer felt the need to be as friendly to their occupiers. To make matters worse for the German side, they lacked not only food and supplies, but directive in the immediate lead-up to D-Day. Having been convinced that the Allies wouldn't dare cross the Channel in June because of poor weather conditions, Rommel had gone home to celebrate his wife's birthday and to subsequently meet with Hitler. Von Rundstedt opted not to disturb Rommel because of his mistaken belief that the paratrooper landings, which took place on June 5th, a day before the naval invasion, were a ploy to distract the Germans from the real Allied target, Calais.
See, now, as I mentioned earlier, the key, at least in Rommel's mind, the key to the entire defense of the Atlantic Wall was the ability to quickly counterattack and push the Allies back off the beaches. Rommel knew that once the Allies established a beachhead, the game was over, that it was just a matter of time before they defeated Germany. So he knew that that first 24, 48 hours basically would decide the war. And that's where the Germans messed up the most. And it was a combination of things. It was Rommel not being there. It was Hitler not wanting to be disturbed because he slept in the mornings. It was the inability to get past the destruction and the havoc that had been wreaked by paratroopers and the French resistance. So that was one of the keys to D-Day, was the prevention of Germans from being able to properly reinforce.
By the time Rommel arrived on the evening of June 6th, it was too late. All 5 of the landing sites the Allies selected were secured. Operation Fortitude, the Allied deception strategy, had done its work. Now that we understand the lead up to this momentous event, let's take a look at the Normandy landings through the German soldiers' perspective. The location we'll be evaluating in this video is codenamed Utah Beach. It is one of the 5 landing sites that the Allies chose for their invasion. In the months preceding the landing, the soldiers stationed there had been busy at work, erecting gun emplacements and setting up stakes, tripods, barbed wire, and landmines. Streams had been dammed and the floodgates of the Douve were open to flood the land behind the beach as another deterrent. Such obstacles would not have been present in Normandy if Erwin Rommel hadn't learned from Axis mistakes at the Allied landings at Salerno, Italy in 1943. How many times must the German soldier have laid awake at night, questioning themselves, would it all be enough? It was on a night like this, around midnight, that over 2,000 Allied bombers began wreaking havoc on the coast. The effectiveness of the bombing raid on the night of June 5th is disputable, but unlike bombing raids of the past, there was further escalation.
Yeah, and the bombings didn't have nearly the impact the Allies hoped. A lot of the bombs got dropped too far inland. A lot of the bombs just didn't have the impact that they hoped they would. Same with the naval shelling on D-Day. It didn't have nearly the impact that they wanted it to. Not everything went right on D-Day. There were a lot of things that didn't go well. The drops by the airborne were all over the place and chaotic, and it's a small miracle that they were able to be as effective as they were with the airborne troops.
Paratroopers also started landing in the vicinity. Skirmishes between the paratroopers and the defenders continued until the sun came up, but by that point it became clear that the paratroopers had not come alone. A wall of ships was slowly coming into view on the horizon, and a naval bombardment commenced. Paul Goetz, the same soldier we referred to earlier, said this of the scene.
As soon as we walked over the dunes and saw thousands of ships, and all those landing boats and barrage balloons, I knew the war was lost.
Yeah, could you imagine how demoralizing? And they show that in the movie The Longest Day, where the guy calls and he says, ships, thousands of them. And his commanding officer he's talking to says, they don't even have that many ships. And he says, well, I'm looking at them right now. And they said, well, where are they headed? And he said, right for me. But yeah, and somebody asked about air superiority. Yes. The Allies had air superiority, but that does not mean that the Luftwaffe didn't have planes that could be effective. It was enough of a concern that when the initial waves went ashore, some of the special forces actually went ashore with men carrying barrage balloons that were attached to them that would keep from the Luftwaffe being able to come in and strafe the troops as they landed.
Who could blame him for his hope vanishing? All around him, buildings crumbled and domesticated animals ran freely. But whether they clung to hope or not, the defenders were still prepared to put up a fight despite the chaos unleashed around them. With minimal air support, they knew it was up to them to try to stop the Allied advance. At least a few soldiers must have been glad to finally face action, liberated of that feeling of not knowing when the inevitable would come. Joseph B., a staff sergeant, wrote this.
Finally the hour has come. Although it had to happen and was foreseeable, it impressed me a lot. Of course it is not a trifle. For sure, these hours the greatest battle is taking place that the world has ever seen. Hopefully, fortune is with us now.
Many of the soldiers away from their positions tried to regroup amid the maelstrom. Those that did make it converged in fortified bunkers, equipped with mounted machine guns and anti-aircraft flak guns. However, they could only fire upon the invaders in vain, as waves and waves of troops landed on the beaches. When U.S.
Imagine being these German troops, and they, like they said, they weren't all German. Some of them were Poles or Czechs or people that had been conscripted in conquered nations, that the first chance they got, they were going to surrender and give themselves up. They didn't want to fight for the Germans. But imagine, you're going to get overrun. You see the power that is coming toward you. You can inflict some casualties on the way, but at some point, you're either going to be killed or if you're lucky, you're going to be captured. Oh man, I can't imagine what that was like. I can't imagine going into a fight knowing you're going to lose no matter what you do.
Soldiers inevitably closed in on the bunkers. Incendiary weapons like flamethrowers and white phosphorus were used with great effect. Arms experts at globalsecurity.org write, "These weapons are particularly nasty because white phosphorus continues to burn until it disappears. If service members are hit by pieces of white phosphorus, it could burn right down to the bone." Just on Normandy, 5 American Medal of Honors were given in part to the usage of white phosphorus grenades. By the end of the morning on June 6th, most of the resistance points in all of the beaches had fallen to the Allies, allowing their armored divisions to support the infantry's inland advance. Much like at Utah Beach, German forces at Sword Beach had to contend with paratroopers who had dropped behind their lines and captured critical points. Helmut Rumer, a German soldier captured after hiding for 36 hours, wrote,
"We were exhausted, and we decided to hand ourselves over to the British."
At Gold Beach, the defenders were severely weakened by an aerial bombardment and therefore were defeated within an hour. At Juno Beach, the Canadian troops managed to not only secure their objective, but they also marched further inland than any other landing party.
Mr. Jesus, I can't really grow a beard. I sometimes have a little bit of facial hair, like right here on my chin, but I can't grow a beard. Like this part doesn't grow. So, I get a little stubble every so often, but usually the night before church I shave it. So that's why usually on Sundays I look a little more clean shaven. You guys talking about war crimes. Yes, what we would call war crimes definitely happened on both sides. Obviously the Axis powers, I think, were much more intentional and much more widespread in those things. But yeah, for example, on D-Day, you had paratroopers, I think, pretty much being ordered not to take prisoners. They just couldn't. They could not take prisoners with the mission that they were given. So what do you do when a guy surrenders and you're not allowed to take prisoners? It's tough. Places like you had the Malmedy massacre, where the Germans massacred a group of almost 100 Americans. Not long after that, the Americans did the same to a group of Germans. Americans in the 11th Armored Division massacred a group of German soldiers in retaliation for that. It's definitely something that happened on both sides.
Finally, at Omaha, German resistance was the most effective because of how close the bunkers were placed to the shore. But with so many troops landing, the German defenders at Omaha were also overrun. If you'd like to learn more about the events that brought Hitler's ruin with some of my favorite books on the topic, we have an exciting announcement for you. Books on D-Day by Stephen Ambrose, Anthony Beaver, and Rick Atkinson are all available among the unmatched selection of audiobooks on Audible.
I highly recommend Stephen Ambrose's book on D-Day. It's excellent, and it's very in-depth. You can see it's 25 hours long in the audiobook. That's a long book.
In fact, if you decide to try Audible for free for 30 days, you can find an audiobook related to just about every topic that we've covered on this channel. Visit audible.com/armchairhistorian or text armchairhistorian to 500-500. If you become a member, you'll unlock one of my favorite features, Audible Originals, which gives you access to a wide array.
So, I see there's some debate going on about who won the war and who contributed the most. It's not a debate worth having as far as I'm concerned, because there's no such thing as one country having done the most or had the most important. It's a collaborative effort. That's the whole point of an alliance, is that everybody contributes. Yes, the Soviets lost more men from the Allies. Yes, the Americans contributed more in terms of money and materials than anybody. That doesn't mean one or either is more important. Yes, the British obviously stood alone for a lot of it. Everybody's contribution was important. I think it's silly to try and debate whose contribution was more important or who won the war. That's not how it works at all. Doge Daddy, please stop asking me that. We're not talking about my religion right now. We're talking about D-Day. All right, this is one more that I want to show you, and I want to recommend that you guys watch this whole interview if you get a chance. I'm just going to show you some highlights, but on the 20th anniversary of D-Day, former president at this point, Dwight Eisenhower, sat down for this extended D-Day interview talking through the entire invasion and everything that went into it and his part with it. They actually go to the beaches and talk about it. It's really fascinating to watch. I just want to show you a few clips of it.
He also had some in Sicily. So it was it wasn't in the cards. You couldn't go.
So you stood down on the 4th.
That's right, and that was it. And the weather when we did that looked so lovely. But in the morning of the 5th, Walter, here's the big thing. Morning of the 5th, I came over here. The weather was terrible. This house was shaking. Now, you know, this, you said, well, there's no use almost of looking at this thing again. But there's this one thing about it. It certainly increased my confidence in Captain Stagg and his crowd, because 24 hours earlier, when it looked so bad, so nice, they said, this is what you're going to have. And we had it. Oh, it was really storming.
General Eisenhower, who was here with you?
Well, first of all, was my Chief of Staff, General Smith, an American. And then we had General Montgomery from the British forces and General Bradley from ours. Then there was Ramsey, who was the naval commander, Lee Mallory, who was the British commander of the Air Forces.
And Trafford Lee Mallory was actually killed a few months later, I think, in a plane crash. This is from the 20th anniversary of D-Day. This was an interview with Eisenhower and Walter Cronkite. So please drop the religion argument, guys, before I start banning people, okay? Why do I like history so much? I just have always been fascinated by it. From the time I was a kid, I just found myself really, really interested in history. And I don't know if I could point to anything in particular as the reason why. I just do. Why did the Allies land on North France instead of anywhere else? I think it had to be France just because that was closest to the UK, and anywhere further away would have just been too much of a logistical issue. Remember, they had already landed in Italy, so France is not the first landing in Europe. They've got a front on the east with the Soviets. They've got a front on the south in Italy, but now they're opening up the western front. Yeah, and actually, Stagg was not a captain. He was, I think, a group captain, which I want to say is the equivalent of like a colonel in the American Air Force. In Blonde Ops, I do have a couple of jobs outside of this. I'm a speaker for an organization called Rachel's Challenge. I speak in schools all over the country, talking about kindness and things like that.
Deputy was Tedder, and all those people were here. And there wasn't too much talk. We listened, and all of us had heard this, time and again, because you remember, we had made practice runs. We'd had Captain Stagg and his group before us, certainly before me, for twice a day for some days to just see how this thing worked out. Because we'd always have the proof 2 days later, you see. And he had told us the evening before, we might have a little bit of improvement in this weather next day, and we talked that over. That was about 10 o'clock on the night of June the 4th. We talked it over and we chatted around here maybe for a half hour. But the next morning, when he came in, sort of a little grin on his face, he didn't laugh too much, but he was a fine man. And he said, well, now I'll give you some good news.
Somebody mentioned it about Group Captain Stagg. Yes, he was a civilian when he was appointed to the position of being the chief meteorologist for SHAEF, which is Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. He was given the rank of group captain, so he would have the authority, the gravitas, the influence necessary for the position that he had. That is absolutely correct.
And then he told us about this high that got in here and gave us some hope. And he, as I remember, he predicted this good weather would last between 24 and 36 hours. Now that wasn't too good because you could get so many troops ashore and then have to stop landing. It would be pretty bad. But we were trying for these, these artificial ports, and we hoped that with this break, we could do it. It was still a chancy thing.
Do I know where Eisenhower came from in military schools? Yeah, he was a graduate of West Point. He went to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, but he mostly served on staff positions. There's a lot of, you see a lot of Group Captain Stagg in the movie Ike, Countdown to D-Day with Tom Selleck. And at one point, Eisenhower gets really frustrated with him, and he's telling him he needs a better report. And General Bradley says to him, he says, he just predicts the weather. Ike, he doesn't make the weather. He just gives you the information that he has. You know, he's just doing the best he can with it. But yeah, the most important weather forecast in history.
And said that the waves now on the beaches were not going to be more than 3 feet or something of that kind, and the wind was going down. There'd be some opportunity for bombing, and the gunfire from the naval ships could be spotted pretty well. I thought it was just the best of a bad bargain, so I possibly sat silently just reviewing these things, maybe, I'd say 35 or 45 seconds. Now it's been reported by some of the people present. For example, my own chief staff says 5 minutes. Well, I know that one, but 5 minutes under such conditions sounds like a year. Actually, I'd think after 30, 45 seconds, something like that, I just got up and said, okay, we'll go, and this room was emptied in...
Yeah, so think about the pressure on Eisenhower. He's got to decide, either we're going, and they had to give the order not completely knowing how good the weather was going to be. There was some question whether or not the weather was going to be good enough and whether that would wreak havoc on things. But it was either that or they were going to have to stand down for at least a couple of weeks and maybe miss the opportunity to invade altogether. Somebody asked, do I think that the D-Day landings were necessary? Yes, I do. Do I think that Germany would have lost the war anyway? Yeah. But they still were necessary to bring a speedy end to the war, to also kind of... and keep in mind that part of this too was thinking ahead to the post-war world where they didn't want the Soviets to have complete dominance over all of Europe, which is what would have happened had they not opened this second front. So if you guys are commenting or asking things that have nothing to do with D-Day, I'm going to just ignore them. We're talking about D-Day right now. So as soon as he made the decision, he was the most useless man in the room. Yeah, that's pretty much true. All right, I want to find you another couple of scenes of this here, because it's just a really fascinating interview altogether.
But we did put some big ones in there. And
so here he is on the beach.
Attack. But that great storm, which threw some 300 to 500 ships up on these beaches that had come over here on their own power. I mean, that kind of thing. It was a terrific thing. And, of course, it was uncomfortable. But the storm was so great that the Germans couldn't really move themselves, you see. So it wasn't nearly as dangerous as it could have been. Now, unfortunately, our artificial port over on the American side was on a sand base, really.
So this is the Mulberry Harbors.
And when the storm came, it broke up. This one didn't. They used this one right on, until September. And probably, I think, until we got to Antwerp, this was used very heavily, and it was a godsend to us. And the British were the ones that conceived it and had the great major part of its building.
General, the fact that storm came in on June 19th, which was the next available date for you to have gone.
So yeah, they would have had a storm on the date that they would have gone. So had he not made the decision to go when they did, they might not have landed. At least until maybe not landed at all that summer. Let's see what else they say here.
Flanked by PT boats, they carved a path through the German minefields to their appointed stations on the coast of France. Now, 20 years later, as General Eisenhower scanned the Norman coast, he explained the difficulties of guiding the right units to the right places in the pre-dawn darkness.
You see, we'd put our minesweepers in here to make sure that when we came in, that we weren't going to be hurt and damaged by the mines. So we had all these minesweepers out ahead of us. They're part of it. And here, on this flat bank, where the British were coming in, they did a very fine thing. They had to guide these small boats in. When you come out 2 or 3, 4 miles, of course, you can easily get lost in the dark and with very few landmarks. they put in these little bits of tiny submarines which had to lay on the bottom during the day that the postponement taking place. But they came up when they knew the invasion was coming in. And they used lights to the stern, you know, or shielded lights, radio, and even visual flags to help these people get right into the right place. And over here, where the current...
So, yeah, okay, I keep talking about this movie, Ike. So let me show you, let me see, I don't know if I can get away with any clips from this without getting copyright issues on me here. But the whole thing is on YouTube in parts, as you can see here. Let me see if I can find a good clip from that, dealing with the parts that we're talking about here. So here's the part where he's dealing with Stagg, talking about the weather, I think.
Attention, all ranks!
Simply don't have the time to make the change.
Oh, this is when he's dealing with De Gaulle, who was just a... I don't have anything good to say about him. Here we go. Here's Group K and B. That's the plan. JD from History Underground, who's become a friend of mine, is putting together a group to go to Normandy probably next May, and I think I'll probably be joining for that. So, but I'm going to wrap this up, guys. I want to get to editing the next part of my trip to Tennessee and Georgia for you guys so I can get that video up. So I'm going to wrap it up right here. Thank you guys so much for being a part of this today. In honor of all of the men from all the nations that fought on D-Day to liberate Europe. Thank you to everybody who donated, who subscribed, and we will see you again soon. Thanks for watching.